Welcome to the Real Life Momz podcast, where we put ourselves at the top of our to-do list. I'm Lisa Foster, your host, and today I'm here with fellow mom, executive coach, and author Stephanie Peirolo, and we are talking about intentional decision making. So I can't wait to hit this topic. But hi, Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you because decision making is, let's face facts, it's tough. You never know if you're making the right one. You always like, especially with big life decisions. I know you've written a book and it helps us guide us through some of these big life decision making. And I'm sure we'll jump into that in a little bit. But one of my first questions is, what do you think people do traditionally if they're not intentionally making decisions? What are they doing in making their decisions?
They may have a desire to be intentional about their decisions, but often we are taught that decisions are valid insofar as they are rational. So everybody has probably been told to make a pros and cons list, look at the practical factors, and that's valid. But for big life decisions, I find it's equally important to listen to your heart. And a lot of times, the kind of practical, rational pros and cons lists may be at odds with your kind of true calling, especially depending on what you grew up learning. So imagine someone who grows up in a family where the only viable careers are medicine or engineering, and they decide that they really want to be a teacher. And again, it's not a judgment. It's just recognizing that if you are making a rational decision, or if you're doing what your elders tell you to do, or what your family expects of you, that is a way of making decisions that often removes our real true heart's desire or calling from the equation. And so my hope is to try to reintegrate what it is that we actually want into the decision-making process while still being based in reality.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of things flooding into my head. So it's so true. I feel like our environment, our families, like our culture, society really plays a big role in decisions. I'm even just off the cuff right now thinking of my son is thinking of colleges right now. And part of me is, do we even need to go to college? But of course, the way I grew up, society, all the things. And he might want to do something a little different. Maybe he wants to do something more international and then you're like, is this right? Is this wrong? But why is it right or wrong? And so I feel it's all these other things that are pulling in. And then you're like, I don't know what the right decision is.
And the way that I think about it is that I have a very bad sense of direction. And so I use my Maps app on my phone all the time. GPS was the greatest invention of my life because I can get lost in my neighborhood. And I rely on that GPS system. I believe that if I plug in an address, it will get me there. And most of us do not have confidence in our own navigational system. So the whole point of my book, The Saint and the Drunk, is to figure out how you can build your own navigational system and develop an internal compass that will work for you in any decision-making process.
Okay, I need this. First of all, I as well am always putting in my GPS because otherwise I'm in circles and I get lost. I have no inner compass when it comes to directions. So, how do we start actually building this? How do we trust our own intuition, our own selves to actually guide us? Because we're always worried that we're making maybe a mistake or the wrong decision. I think that's always the biggest worry, right?
I'm sorry, this is very self-serving, but my book really is meant to be, it's called The Saint and the Drunk, A Guide to Making the Big Decisions in Your Life. And it is meant to be a workbook, like chapter, journal prompts, different instructions. That would be a good place to start. But really, I think the framework is, the first thing is to first understand what it is that you want. Like when the book launched last year and I did a big day-long retreat it was mostly women. There were two men. One of them was my husband, but women from 20 to 85. And I said, so the first thing we want to understand is, what question are you discerning? And that sentence should start with, I want. And there was this like ripple of discomfort in the room because all these women are like, wait, I'm sorry. I'm centering what I want. And I'm like, we're just asking the question. And it should start with I want, because we need to own our wants. So that's the first thing. What do you want? Forget whether it's practical, anything like that. Then what I invite people to do is to look at the realities of their circumstance. So when I was in my early career, I would look at books about career development, and they would say things like, what's your dream? Dream big, all put something into the universe, all of which is great, right? If you love manifesting, you manifest. I was a single mother, 29 years old, two kids who were in preschool, no family support, working 3 jobs 7 days a week. So my framework was really limited. And so what I wanted to build was a framework that took into account the realities. Because I think for moms, we are in a position, and I'm a mom and a grandmother, I think we're in a position of complexity, and that we want to honor our own wants, but we often have to consider other people, right? And some of us more than others, right? Like people who have older kids that are getting ready to leave the nest are in a different circumstance than someone who has maybe a child with special needs or health issues of their own. And you can't do a discernment process without outlining realistically what are your frameworks, right? Because then it just becomes irritating, right? If I'd been rich, sure, I could have gone back to graduate school and gotten my MFA, but that was it's like, I'm going to be a journalist, and that's how I'm going to write, right? And so, and then I really invite people to do a lot of thinking about those stories that we've been told, right? The whole middle part of my book is I take 9 narratives that come up when I do this work with other people. What do we tell ourselves about money? What do we tell ourselves about who takes care of the kids? And just questions, just do some exploration so you can kick the tires a little bit. Does this story that I was told, that as the youngest daughter, I am solely responsible for caring for mom and dad as they age, do I still believe that? Or do I think my 3 older brothers who live nearby could also chip in? There are also stories that support us, right? And so there's that examination. And then I go through a couple of very specific tactics that we can use as channels to understand. So we ask the question, do a little research, figure some stuff out, and then we're waiting for an answer. And what I do is I invite people to try different ways of getting guidance that are not intellectual.
Okay.
So do you want an example of?
I want to know that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'll give you an example of, I'll give you 2. There's more than that in the book, but
Sure.
One of them is what I call the genius of the body. So traditionally, the patriarchy has privileged rational, intellectual pursuits and decision-making processes. Women feel more in their body. We have a more embodied wisdom and understanding often. And so we tune into that channel, and we are often told to disregard that. Many women who go into the hospital, particularly Black women, are going to be told that their assessment of their pain level is inaccurate. It's just a reality. We live our whole lives being told what you are feeling, what you are experiencing isn't valid in one way or another. So to really reclaim, my body has a genius, I am going to try to tap into it. And a couple of examples. One is I find for myself that movement really helps me get in touch with things that I wasn't thinking of. So I like to swim. Often I'll get into the pool in one mood and I'll be swimming and suddenly something will come up. And I'm not talking about an intellectual idea. Oh, I should write a Substack about this. I'm talking about, wow, I am really sad about that conversation that I had with a friend yesterday. And it's in my body, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's other ways to do that. Everything from dance to sex to sensuality to taste. There's so many ways that we can try to check in with that channel. Now, I want to add an important caveat that I talk about in the book. For some of us, the body is not a safe channel. I think of people who have chronic pain. Maybe they have had some sort of sexual trauma. That's okay, because there are other ways, right? And one of the ways that I talk about is called attraction and aversion. And it's looking at what you're drawn to, which we tend to do, right? But also looking at what grosses you out, right? You can have a decision-making ick that isn't rational to anyone else, but that tells you, no, I don't want to do that thing that I'm considering, right? So attraction, if I'm working with an executive coaching client who's a woman in her, let's say, late 40s, and she tells me that the last three movies she watched were about a woman who goes to Tuscany and buys a house and fixes it up, I'm going to suggest to her that if she can afford it, she should go on vacation to Italy.
Yeah.
She is attracted to something about that narrative because that's what's drawing her, right? Someone who has aversion might have if this is another example that I have used in trainings that causes women to become uncomfortable. I talk about a woman having an aversion reaction when she is deciding whether or not to have a baby. She decides she doesn't want to have a baby when she visits her sister and meets her new niece. She realizes at that point she has an aversion reaction. Oh my goodness, my sister had a C-section. This is terrible. It is true for her. But so many women in the audience were like, but maybe she hasn't met the right guy. She can trust her body. So those are a couple of ways. And again, the intellect is involved, but we are fundamentally trying to tune into a channel that is uniquely ours. It is idiosyncratic, which gives it its authenticity and value.
And what I hear over and over again as we're getting these guidances from whether it's your body or the ick factor, I do love that because I feel like even though I feel in tune to my body, I definitely know when I have an ick factor or attraction. That's very clear. However, the trust. Let's talk about the trust and trusting it to be able to move forward to maybe go to Italy, right? And book that vacation after watching three movies. Like, how do we trust that? Because that's, I think, the hardest part to actually move us forward.
That's a great question. And I think there's a couple things about it. One is, I think, reframe your narrative about decisions. So if you want a decision making process that will never fail you, and you will never make a decision that later turns out not to be positive, there is no decision making process that does that, period. And you can make a decision to move to another town, to take a job, to enter a relationship, to end a relationship. And after you take, and that can be a valid decision for you. And then 5 years down the road, it is no longer where you want to be or need to be. In some cases, if you look at an example of a marriage, right? Two people get married, they love each other, it is the right decision for them. And something intervenes and they part. It doesn't mean it was a bad decision. It means that life happened to you. So I think, what is it that you want to trust? Right. So if you can just let go of the idea that there's a one and done decision that you will never have to revisit, that will be a good place to start. And I think the trust thing is to figure out, trust the process. So, for example, if I have an aunt who I'm very close to, she is in her 80s. And whenever I am making a decision, I run it past her. Right. So if you have an elder, if you have it could be a therapist, it could be a spiritual director. If there's somebody who you value as a sounding board, it could be a sister, a brother, trust that person. Right. And you have to trust, if you trust that person, run your thinking by them. Right. Maybe run your thinking by one or two people. Right. Because you don't have to make the decision by yourself. And then the other thing is to question why you don't trust yourself, right? Because essentially that's what we're talking about, trusting yourself. I think also for other people, do you trust your culture? Do you trust your ethical framework? If you have a spiritual practice, do you trust your spiritual practice? And so there's a lot of different ways that you can look at the trust situation. Those are just the ones that first came to mind.
Yeah, I like that. Finding something that you already trust, whether it's a friend or your religion or whatever it is, and bouncing it there if you want to have that. But I think you're right. Ultimately, trusting yourself is really the key.
Yeah.
And I love the thing that you just said about the narrative. It's just there is no wrong decision, really. That's if that feels good to you to do this thing, And then it changes because everything we do, we know as moms, there are different seasons, right? They're small, that's a season. Kids go off to college, that's a whole season. Now it's so different. So of course your decisions are going to be different in different phases and stages. So there is really no wrong one.
And that's also a really good point. I actually have a chapter in my book called Seasons. And one of the things that I talk about is when you are making a decision, reference the other seasons.
Oh, all right.
So
Talk about that. Yeah.
realize this season will pass. So
Mm.
one of the examples that I use is of a couple with young children who is struggling in their marriage. Nothing terrible, just they're in the midst of the kids and the all of the things that can happen in that season. If they think about it and think, okay, this season's going to pass. We have fundamental strength in our relationship. We have an intention to stay together. When that season, if they think we're going to stay together in this season because we have faith in other seasons, then I imagine in the book, fast forward 30 years and they're retired, they're hanging out with their grandchildren, they have a wonderful family and connection, and they have a depth of like just love and respect for each other because they've spent 30 years together, however many years. They made a decision in a difficult season to anticipate a season that could be easier, and they were right. It's the same thing about someone who maybe is uncomfortable in their career who says, gosh, if I go back to, I had somebody say this to me, if I go back to nursing school now, I'm going to be like 25 by the time I graduate. And it's like, honey, you're going to be 25 either way. So why not be 25 and have a nursing degree? And so it's that idea of, yes, this season might be challenging. You're going to be so glad that you saved for retirement or made this move or got the graduate degree or whatever. So it's being aware that this season will change, even if it's a positive season, even if, let's say, you're in a job that's very lucrative and you think it's going to go on forever, still save because you never know what's going to happen. So that awareness that there are seasons and using that, one of the things that comes up in my book is this idea of when you're on your deathbed, what are you going to think about this decision? 20 years from now, what are you going to think about this decision? Really intentionally thinking of yourself in a different season can often give some clarity.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so true. It's like, I think about that sometimes is on my deathbed. Like, first of all, is that going to even matter? Right? Like some of these things, they're not
Right.
that big of a deal. So yeah, I like that as well. That's really good. Now tell me, like you developed this framework, right? This is coming from your experience, correct?
Yes and no. So the framework is, the book's called The Saint and the Drunk. The saint is Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who founded the Jesuit order, he was a mercenary in the 1500s. And he developed this way of making decisions called discernment that's super Catholic. And I was at one point in my life super Catholic. I went through the spiritual exercises and it gave me that was my internal GPS. Did it in my 30s. Then I go to graduate school, I become an executive coach. People see, my friends, people that I work with, they see that I have this way of making decisions that allows me to make big changes. I'm going to go back to graduate school in my 40s. I'm going to do this. And they're like, how do you do it? And I'm stuck because, especially when I start doing executive coaching, I'm not going to roll out the Catholic priest framework for my clients, but it is a framework that's valuable. So then I realized, you know what? There is another framework, which is the drunks framework, which is Bill Wilson was a co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was originally a very Christian program. And some early alcoholics came in and said, so we are not Christian. We don't believe in God at all. We'd prefer not to die drunk. Can you figure out a way that the spiritual program can help us? And the early AA people said, well, why don't you believe in just a higher power, whatever it is, nature, like we don't care. And they tried it and they were able to stop drinking. And I realized that if I took the saint and put it through that same framework of believe in whatever or nothing, and really invited people who were intentional, maybe they're spiritual but not religious, but they want to do something good in the world. whatever that is to them. What if I used those two together to build a way of using this framework? And then I started using it with people. And then I came up with a lot of the other content. Right. So it's like I went through all of this, did it with people from 25 to the whatever ages, and tweaked and found the same themes keep coming up. Right. And the same ideas and these tactics now work because we hadn't thought about those in the 1500s. And so it's a hybrid. And the idea is it's funny because in my publisher is in London, and in London, they say this is a personal development book, which I like. Here in the United States, they say it's a self-help book. And
Yeah.
self-help makes me cringe a little bit because I feel like what self-help books often say is here's your magic process, do these 4 things and happiness will reign upon you. And I feel like what I'm saying is almost like, here's a way to build some strength that you can figure out on your own. Here's a whole bunch of suggestions. Pick which ones resonate with you, discard the rest. Read a
Yeah.
chapter, put the book down. Really, even in the doing of the process, inviting everyone to practice every single page. Does this resonate for me? Like there's this Jesuit saying that I love, which is rest where you find fruit. If you are if you're journaling and journaling really brings you something, keep journaling. When you open the page and think, I don't want to journal, stop journaling.
That's the ick and the attraction, right? To do that. Yeah. So in your life, where have you used this framework? Where has it been the most helpful for you?
I think where it's helpful for me is when I am called to do something difficult and countercultural. So I was for many years an executive in business development, selling the services of large advertising agencies and tech companies. And it was very demanding. I was a woman in a pretty male dominated industry, and that was tough. It still is tough for women that are in male dominated industries. And it was very lucrative. And so I was very focused on providing for my kids. I don't come from wealth. I was like, I want to, and I realized after a certain point that it was challenging me physically, emotionally. It was not good for me. And so I made a decision to go back to graduate school, which was hard work to go to work full time and get a master's degree, and use that as a discernment process. And then I left the corporate world and I went out on my own to do consulting. And you work for yourself. There's good years and bad years. And and I've been doing it for 12 years. And then a couple of years ago, I made a decision that I was going to write this book. And fortunately, it didn't take me very long, but I worked less, which meant less security, less money. And that is also unnerving. And so I feel like where there have been periods of time where I'm like, it'd be so much easier to do this thing that I have an aversion to, that I don't want to keep doing, that my friends were like, please, will you leave advertising? Please you don't need to be like, stop. And I really resisted it. And then I was able to make that decision. And so for me, it's helpful when I really need to tune into that kind of intentional, ethical framework and do something that a lot of people think is crazy, and have that reassurance of, yeah, I understand that this is something that makes you scared for me or for yourself, but I know that this is what's right for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love crazy, actually. It's one of my favorites. But with that said, a lot of people are probably listening and also saying or just stuck in the easy. They're stuck in this is making money, or I can't go back to school, or whatever it is, right? What do you want to say to them?
The first thing I want to say is one of the main concepts that I find myself talking about in reference to this book and is honoring resistance. So we are taught no pain, no gain, push through. I say the opposite. If you are experiencing resistance, honor that. Get curious. If you are in a groove and you feel like this is easy and I don't have the energy or desire, I am resisting changing, honor that resistance. right? Because being a mom takes a lot of work and a lot of energy. And there are plenty of women, especially with younger children, that I know that are like, you know what? I'm not making any big career decisions right now. I just need to do what's easy and what's right in front of me and honor that. Give yourself permission to do this thing, rest where you find fruit, right? And there's nothing wrong with making a paycheck, getting benefits, even if the job is not the greatest thing, right? So I think that's a really key kind of thing to keep in mind. Sorry, what was the rest of the question? Did I
No,
answer the
I
question?
think you
Okay.
answered it. Yeah, I think, yeah, I like that a lot. And I was just saying for a mom who's just feeling kind of stuck in the,
Right.
and staying in easy, in their easy, but maybe they
Right.
do want to,
But
but maybe
let's
they
say if
do
there
want to
is a
move.
desire,
Yeah,
right?
there's
If
a
there is a
desire.
desire,
Yes.
then I think really honoring that and not expecting that you're going to get there right away. Because one of the challenges with the discernment process, and that's why I say discernment really intentionally, it takes a while,
Mm.
right? There is not going to be, once you, now I can make decisions relatively quickly because I have the black belt in discernment. But for most people, it's going to be weeks, months, and it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of time. You need to come up with an idea, allow it to germinate, which should be familiar to anyone that's done a creative project, any artist, anyone that's done therapy, like a meditation practice, even just building a new skill, like learning how to surf or tango. There's kind of, you learn, then you fail, and then you consolidate, and then it's a staggered process. And recognizing discernment will be that. And so realizing that if you have a longing to do something different, you are already on a discernment journey. You have already started. So, yay, you. Now figure out, how do I move forward? What areas do I need to clarify? Are there narratives that are holding me back? Are there some practical considerations that I need to look at? And so recognizing that if you feel called to explore something, that's a gift. That often people who are restless, who feel like I should be doing more, I should be doing something different, they feel as if they have been burdened with some sort of psychic rash. But actually, being a person that is often what's next, it can be a real gift because you are being drawn towards something. You have a desire to create. And if you have that, honor it, because there are plenty of people that go through their life and they're like, this is fine.
Yeah.
And they don't have desire, they don't have drive, they don't have dissatisfaction. And sometimes I envy those people. But for those of us that are a little bit more, I don't know, drawn, curious, driven, whatever you want to call it, embrace that and use that as a launching pad.
Yeah. Someone once said, I forget how they said it, but it was something along the lines of if you are really attracted, really want something, it's because you can do it. You have the tools to do it. And I really always love that. So if it is something that's in your, oh my God, I really wish I could do this or I could do that, it's because you can.
But I think you also have to reframe what you think like doing it looks like,
Yeah.
right? If I waited to write a book until I had a publisher, I would never have written a book. If I thought the only way for me to do this is in this particular way, so the idea is if you are drawn to something, you can do it, but the doing of it may challenge your expectations of it. I have to tell you, I published my first book through a publisher when I was 62 years old. And I was pretty much convinced that in spite of everything I knew intellectually, I was going to be on the New York Times bestseller list. People were going to be beating down my door. None of that happened. I had to reframe my expectations. And so the idea is I was called to write this book. I wrote this book. And then I had to reframe what me being able to do it and the results meant. Doesn't mean it's not still valuable, but my notion of success was not aligned with reality as we know it.
Maybe success was that you actually completed the book and got it published, right? Like that's
Yeah.
a different kind of success. Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
also, I think we're in a culture that's very obsessed with how many likes or followers or whatever you have. And I think to myself, I have a new metric. I have sold enough copies of this book that I couldn't fit everybody who owns it into my house.
That's great.
And I'm like, that's fantastic. I have a Substack and I'm like, more people read it every week than could fit into my house. I don't have a huge house, but like when I think of it that way, I'm like, that's success. I want to sell out my house, do too many people for my house, and it's a win.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, if you think about all the people who bought your book and they were in one room, or all the listeners, and if they were
Right.
in one room, it's like, wow, that's a lot of people. So that's cool. But yes, once again, you do things. I do it because you love them, and success will eventually follow in your definition of success, right?
Which may evolve.
Which may evolve. Yes. Tell us where the listeners can find you and all the wonderful things you offer.
So there's a link to my website, which is speirolo.com. Not going to spell it. You can go to the link and it will have information about the things I write, my book. I offer corporate coaching and also individual executive coaching. And I'm launching some other new things. So get on my mailing list so that you can find out about the cool stuff that I have coming down the pike. And on Substack, I am at speirolo. I have my own Substack called Fierce Grace. And I do a wonderful podcast called The Bad Boss Brief with my old friend from college, Eugene S. Robinson. And we talk about bad bosses and work and all sorts of things. We've known each other for 40 years and it's a blast. So they're all free. You don't have to pay to subscribe. And so you can go and listen to me in many venues.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear it. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and giving us this nice new framework that we can use when making our next decision.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a delight.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about Stephanie and everything that she has to offer, just click on the link in the show notes. And until next week, keep carving out time for yourself and keep putting yourself on top of your to do list.